Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Melissa Heatley. I'm the Marketing Manager for NSF International Strategic Registrations, also known as NSF-ISR, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. First, I will touch on a few housekeeping items, and then I will provide some brief introductions and hand it over to Don McFarland, who will be presenting today's webinar. So you each have a control panel where you can find your audio settings, as well as a chat box where you can ask questions directly to us by selecting Send Questions to Staff. You can also chat with other attendees, so that's exciting. You can all talk amongst yourselves. And with that being said, let's jump into some introductions. So our host today is Don McFarland, who is the Aerospace Technical Manager for NSF-ISR. For the last 20 years, Don has worked in a variety of technical and managerial capacities within the aerospace, medical, and commercial goods industries. He has been auditing for nearly 10 years with the CB and also has served as the technical manager for NSF-ISR's Aerospace Business Unit since 2014. In addition, he works with the AAQG's Registration Management Community and the America's Aerospace Quality Standards Committee, AAQSC. He resides in northern Utah. Today, Don is accompanied by two of our NSF-ISR Business Unit Managers, Mike McRandall, who's Business Unit Manager of our Aerospace and Automotive Management Systems Program, and Marty Willem, Business Unit Manager of our Quality Management Systems Programs. And with that, I'll hand it off to you, Don.
Thanks, Melissa, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I just got a message from Mr. McRandall that said he's having some audio issues, so he won't be participating as much today, but Marty's on and he'll join in as needed to participate or to communicate with us. So I'm going to go to the slide that talks about our agenda, and you'll see that we have a poll we're going to do first. We'll go to the ISO 9001 origins, talk a little bit about the baseline requirements for 9001, some accountability and oversight topics, and then talk through some of the challenges that implementation brings and some considerations associated with that. And then we'll open it up for some closing thoughts or questions. In order to get those questions into the webinar, if you would, please put your, type those into the chat function, and we will review those as we get to the end of the session. So with that, we're going to start off with a poll, and Melissa's going to launch our poll for us. So question number one, when did you start working with a formal ISO 9001 based management system? You can see a lot of options here dating back to the Department of Defense MIL-Q 9858, the earlier versions of the ISO standards, and then into the later versions, or if you're just starting through this process, you can type that as well. We'll give everybody another couple seconds here to enter their information, then we'll close the poll. Say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we've got a number of folks that started in the 2000 era, some of the old timers, if you will, that are 9858 based, or even some of those British standards that came about back then. And then a handful that are still just starting out on their journey. So that's great, a good mix of people. We're going to do our next poll. Melissa's going to launch that for us. please select how much you agree with the statement. The 2015 version of ISO 9001 is more prescriptive than the previous ISO. So this is saying the new version is more prescriptive than the 2000 or the 2008 version of ISO 9001. Do you strongly agree that the 2015 is more strict, or do you strongly disagree that the 2015 is more strict? We'll give everybody just a couple more seconds here. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay. So it looks like most people believe the 2015 version is more prescriptive than the predecessor versions, with a handful that disagree and some just don't know. That's interesting. I think from a majority of the CB community, we would say that the 2015 version is less prescriptive. It puts more emphasis on you as an organization understanding who you are and what's important to you, and then building a system around that. And we'll get into that in a little more detail here. So let's go on to the next slide. Melissa, can I advance past the poll? Oh, perfect, thank you. So the ISO 9001 origins, we're going to start a little bit with where it came from and how it came to be. You'll see the 9858 from the Department of Defense was really the precursor to all of these organized quality system standards. And there's a lot of history that goes into the creation of 9858, but that was really one of those original standards that kind of led to the quality system to be organized into what we see today. NATO had the AQAP documents, which for those that don't recall, it's the Allied Quality Assurance Publication. And that was the standard that really took the 9858 on an international scale. By the way, the Department of Defense still invoked 9858 into contract until the mid 90s. It was canceled in 96, I believe, but it was still a pretty relevant standard for a number of years until the more global adoption of the ISO 9001 series. Within Britain, there was the British Standard 5179. It's a three-part standard that had a three-part guidance document that invoked 5750 that was the standard. Came out in the late 70s, early 80s, and it became another version of this. And obviously there was a need for some global harmonization so that everybody's working on an international basis and an international level to the same sheet of music. So the 9000 standards first came to be in 1987, as you see. Now the target is for a release every 5 years, or for a revision to be started every 5 years. And that's something needed to maintain the accredited status of the document itself. So the committees will trigger their revision every 5 years. And as we know, it takes a little bit longer than 5 years to create a document. So there's some varying intervals to which those are released. We know that 1994 had a very procedural centric document, and I can't remember off the top of my head, I want to say it was like 12 or 16 required documented procedures under that version. And then in the 2000 era, went to 6. You had a couple other records that were required depending on the level that you were at. The other change that happened in the 2000 era was the 9001 and became a single document, as opposed to under the 94 standard, we had ISO 9001 94, we had ISO 9002 1994, and we had ISO 9003 1994. depending on the nature of the production or the nature of the distribution type work that you were doing, and whether or not there was design activity within your organization. Those were all rolled into a single document in 2000, and you had the ability to exclude some of those requirements. We know the 2008 version came out, and I think everyone could arguably say it was pretty minimal change, pretty unimpactful overall within the 2008 document. But 2015 was a pretty drastic shakeup to the document itself. It removed a number of documented procedures, changed the nomenclature by which we call things. And if you want to hear of a contentious debate, I had the opportunity to sit on the U.S. Technical Advisory Group for the ISO standard for a while, and the most contentious discussion we had was surrounding documents and records versus documented information. It was a very, very interesting discussion, and at the end of the day, the intent is really the same between them. It's just different vernacular. So that was one of many changes that came in the 2015 standard, and we'll talk about a few more of those changes. First, I want to get into what ISO is. So who is ISO? ISO actually started under a different name back in the mid-20s. It was the International Federation of National Standardizing Associations. During World War II, they dissolved that organization, but a lot of the work rolled into what we know today as the International Organization for Standardization. And that was founded in February of 47, I believe. It was definitely in 47. I just can't remember the month off the top of my head. But either way, we can see that International Organization for Standardization doesn't align with ISO. So it's important to point out that ISO is not an acronym. It actually originates from the Greek root isos, meaning equal. And that was something that was revealed much later, way past 1947. But it is meant to create a harmonized standard or a globally harmonized standard for a number of different things. The 9000 family is just one of many that they manage. In fact, as you can see on the presentation here, there's over 23,000 different documents that are published through the ISO group or the ISO organization. And they have roughly 250 different technical committees that are working on a number of different products throughout their portfolio. There's a secretariat in Geneva that's a rotating body that I believe there's 20 different countries or 20 different organizations involved, depending on the standards committee that it's on. And then this information is partially correct as far as the number of member countries. There's actually like 164, but some of those have partial voting rights. So it really works out to be 140 member countries that are contributing and participating in the process, although 164 different nations are being represented within these committees within the standards body, okay? ISO is a consortium that brings industry experts together from across the globe through these member country participants. And they utilize these technical committees as a means of capturing the industry's best knowledge surrounding a particular subject and putting it into a document, whether it be an advisory document or a standard or something along those lines. And all of the 9001 series or the 9001 family of documents are handled under one technical committee, the TC 176 it's called. So they have a number of different members that participate in these in the committee, and you can see that they have a few subcommittees as well that are tailored towards different aspects of the QMS. Because it's such a broad category, there's a number of different subcommittees involved. And then you can see some different task force and then the technical groups that are associated with different functions or different types of documents that are being produced through those or through the technical committee. Participation is voluntary, as it says, and even though you may have multiple people that are participating or representing a country, only one vote is allowed per country that's participating. So ANSI within the US, American National Standards Institute, is the member representative that goes, and one person gets to vote on behalf of USA, and the direction for the USA is created by that US Technical Advisory Group, or TAG 176, as it says on the slide there. And multiple people are participating in that TAG 176, trying to create a response or a direction that the USA group wants to present at the TC level, and maybe handle some assignments. But each member country may have a similar structure associated with how they're participating. The changes, the balloting, the interpretation all come from the various subcommittees depending on where that standard is located, and there's a lot of different rules associated for the balloting process hitting each one of those member countries. In the interest of time, we're just going to say it's a complicated process, and it's one that's meant to gather the input from a number of different folks, not just thrown out to the organizations across the world. So there's a lot that goes into it, and they take those revisions very seriously. As far as the baseline for ISO 9001, one of the cool changes that came in the 2015 version was the introduction of Annex SL. And even though it's been called a few different things through the implementation phase of it, I think we've settled on the Annex SL vernacular for now. So Annex SL creates this high-level structure which identifies 10 different clauses, and you can see them labeled there. All of the documents that are under the Annex SL structure will have this same organization. So clause 4 is always context to the organization, clause 5 is always leadership, et cetera, et cetera. And the benefit to that is now for organizations that are implementing an integrated management system with maybe a 9001 and a 14,000, or if you're throwing your 18 or 45 or whatever version you're at now for the occupational health and safety, or if you're throwing the information systems with the 20 or the 27,000, those will all align very well under this Annex SL. So now as you're building your management system, we don't have to have a separate quality management system and an environmental management system. We can truly have that unified business management system approach, which is wonderful. For you as an organization to not have to create something just for the auditor's sake is probably more meaningful than anything else, right? And as an auditor, we can see what you're truly doing across the business versus just what you're wanting to show us or what you think you want us to see. So it's really beneficial from that aspect. The other cool thing about this is it aligns everything for the future. So now as other documents are being introduced, it allows those standards to learn from years and years, and we can even say decades in this case, of history, and know the types of things that have to be fleshed out as a new standard is being rolled out to the global community. So the high level structure is here, it's here to stay. And Marty can correct me if I'm wrong on this. As far as I'm thinking here, 13485 is the only standard management system standard right now that doesn't really follow the high level structure of Annex SL. And if I remember correctly, that was because it was too far along in the revision process when Annex SL was released, or when the 9001 document was released. But they've already said, the committee's already said, that future versions of the 13485 will adopt Annex SL.
That's correct.
Fair? Outstanding. So the next slide here talks to the ISO 9000 family of documents, and you're going to hear me say 9000, 9001 used somewhat interchangeably, although it's very important to note that the ISO 9001 document is the requirements document that the certification is given against. The ISO 9000 family is the the series of documents that are tied to the management systems and quality management systems. And there's a few documents that are underneath that family, both on the implementation side as well as the support and guidance documents. And a few of those are listed here. This is not an exhaustive list. There are a number of documents that are managed under that TC 176 group, from a translation standpoint, from an implementation standpoint, from a guidance standpoint, but you can see a few of them here. And the key ones I want to point out are on the left-hand side of your screen, and it's the 9000 Fundamentals and Vocabulary document, and that'll be a 2015 version document today as well. But that is the document that defines what words specifically mean, or what meaning those words have as they appear in the standard. So as we talk about customers, this is the document that says customers can be internal and external, or suppliers or external providers could be external or internal. And it's important to keep those definitions in mind, because we all grew up a little different. We all have our own biases or our own understandings of what these words mean. So the 9000 creates that level playing field for all of us to operate on. The 9001 provides that baseline of the requirements that are fundamental to any organization. And the 9001 document, as we know, is written for any industry, any type of product or service that's being delivered. I've personally audited a hospital. I've audited a service provider that does electrical contracting. I've done companies that build aircraft and missiles and a bunch of defense-related products, medical device companies, and anything in between. I've audited companies that have one person all the way up to a company that had 100,000 people. And the standard fits. The degree to which it's implemented is going to depend on the organization, and we'll talk to that in a little more detail later on in the presentation. That's where 9004 comes into play, and you can see that has a different date. That one was released most currently in 2018, and that serves as a guidance document that helps to understand what's intended within the standard, within the 9001 document, as well as how to effectively implement it for sustained success. It's a phenomenal document. If you haven't looked at it, I strongly encourage folks to obtain a copy of that from ASQ or from the ISO.org website. But a phenomenal document that helps provide that guidance on how to implement the ISO standard, the ISO 9001 standard within your system. And then on the support and guidance document side, you can see a number of those that are related to different topics. And there's a whole bunch more standards that are available, whether, and I shouldn't say the word standard, I'll say documents, because some of them are requirements and a number of those are going to be guidelines associated with suggested implementation characteristics or features of your system, depending on the type of industry or the type of work you're performing. Sorry, trying to advance the slide here. There we go. In addition to the ISO 9001 document that really paved the way for the quality system globally, a number of industries have taken a look at the baseline requirements that are presented by the ISO 9001 standard and said, yeah, us too, we want that. But because of the nature of what we do, we need to have these characteristics embedded. Or it needs to be tweaked a little bit to focus on, say, environmental or occupational health and safety. And you can see some of them, try to list them in alphabetical order, no certain priorities or anything, but you have some of them that are directly tied to ISO group, some of them that simply license the content of ISO and supplement it with their own industry requirements. And in the case of IATF, it's a separate standalone document that is meant to supplement the ISO requirements tied to the ISO 9001. As an example, on the aerospace side, There's some focus on traceability and counterfeit parts. On the medical device document, they put some emphasis on sterile devices, implantable devices, batch records or device history records, that kind of thing. And it really just takes the industry's needs and adopts those into the document so that it becomes a more standardized practice across all of the companies within that industry segment. A lot of that is driven by regulatory requirements associated with that industry, or the OEMs, the prime contractors, or the quote unquote big boys that are performing work for that industry. So it really depends on the industry as to how that organization works, and we'll talk a little bit about that for a couple of those industries. But there are industry-specific documents that can supplement. They certainly use that base document as the overall guidance, the overall means of the overall baseline, I should say. So the next portion here is going to talk to accountability and oversight. And what's key to note here is we all have a boss. Even on the CB auditor side, we're accountable for the accreditation of your certificate, because you wouldn't want to buy, or you wouldn't want to go to a certification body that doesn't have an accredited process. So we're responsible to maintain that accreditation in accordance with some rules that roll all the way up to an international accreditation forum. And they're the folks that, under the direction of those standards writing bodies that deploy the guidance on how to, or the requirements on how to create these standards. They create the harmonized rules that all CBs and all accreditation bodies and all auditor authentication groups across the world work to. You'll see the IAF mark on certain types of certificates just to denote that it's a part of the process. Some industries don't allow the accreditation body marks or the IAF mark, just based on the nature of how the structure is created. But for NSF, everything that we do as a certification body, all of the management system standards we have are accredited by one body or another. I'm putting the ISO 9001 structure in this picture so you can see that ISO 9001 is delivered to a certified company by NSF-ISR as a certification body. We are accredited by ANAB for that service. They come and audit us against a different standard. They perform witness audits of us delivering that service in the field, as well as the report reviews and office activities associated with it. And then they're ensuring that we're meeting the requirements of IAF. IAF does some oversight activities on ANAB as well to make sure that they're following their practices, their requirements. So there's checks and balance that exist across the industry to make sure that everything is going in accordance with those rules, and that every CB is really at a level playing field. Every certified company that has this piece of paper hanging on the wall should have a system that is capable of delivering a good product. What this structure doesn't guarantee is that folks running a business are going to make good decisions. That's going to be on you. The standard only gives you the tools to make those educated decisions. It's going to be up to the management team to make those good decisions, and then to react when maybe you don't make a good decision, which happens. But this structure is going to ensure that everybody with an ISO 9001 certificate, an accredited ISO 9001 certificate, has the tools in place to meet that baseline across the globe. Now I say accredited, I emphasize accredited for a reason. There are certification bodies that are not accredited, that carry no accreditations. And let me preface this by saying ANAB, as an example, is based in the US. They've got a global presence though. Their accreditation, because of this international accreditation forum, their accreditation is valid globally. There are certification bodies that don't carry those accreditation marks or those accreditation activities, and their certificates show that they've been reviewed, that they've been assessed, but not necessarily to the same level, to the same rules as accredited certification bodies. It's no different than an accredited school or university and a non-accredited. We all know which diploma we'd want from a university. We definitely would want to have an accredited certificate, somebody that has one of those accreditation marks on their certificate. For different industry segments, there are other folks that are involved in the oversight. On the aerospace, as an example, ANAB is a huge part of the oversight activities for us, but there's also the industry-controlled other party that operates on behalf of the International Aerospace Quality Group. And that IAQG is a group of member companies of the Boeings and Airbuses and Lockheed Martin type companies of the world, GE, Moog, etc. They're involved in these discussions, creating the standards and tweaking them to meet the needs, the dynamic needs of the industry. They're creating the rules associated with how this is deployed, trying to follow those IAF rules or the ISO rules as much as possible. They also do their own level of witness audits and their own observations in the field to make sure that both ANAB is doing an effective job, as well as the CBs, the auditors themselves. So they interject themselves at all of those different levels through the process. Automotive has a similar organization. The International Automotive Oversight Body works on behalf of the International Automotive Task Force. They again interject themselves in there. They do the accreditation activity themselves rather than relying on an ANAB type activity. Again, the point of this is we all have a boss. There's a level of overview, a level of accountability that every organization has. And there's a lot of rules that we have to adhere to from the certification body side, the accreditation body side, and those translate into maybe some requirements that you as a certified organization don't know. Our goal with these webinars and some of the materials that we release is to ensure that we're deploying that information, sharing the expectations across the supply base, NSF customer or not, because our overall goal is to improve the quality of the supply chain for everybody, right? To make sure that we're all working to that minimum baseline. And the more information we can give you, the better off we're all going to be. And truthfully, the fewer nonconformities our auditors have to write in the field when you don't necessarily know about a requirement, but you're still required to follow it. I can tell you as a 10-year quality director, that was my biggest complaint. Prior to joining the auditor side, that was my biggest complaint, is the unwritten or unknowns that we would get dinged for, and I hated it. So I wanted to make sure that at NSF as a company, we're doing what we can to share that information with you more proactively. Some guidance materials that may help. There are a ton of resources available, and I know you all have just ample free time to go through those resources, but I want to highlight a few that might be worth your while. A lot of this stuff is going to be geared towards the auditor. It's going to be geared towards what we would do in the field, but I'll tell you, if you're looking to sharpen your pencil for the internal audits, if you're looking to make those more effective, or if you're looking for ideas on what the heck does this particular verbiage mean in the standard, or how do we better meet those requirements, these are phenomenal resources you can go to, okay? The IAF has some informational documents that are really pointed at specific things. Unless you know what you're looking for, you may not be able to find those. But the ISO Technical Committee 176 Audit Practices Group has a number of documents that provide guidance on how to do or how to audit particular aspects of a 9001 base QMS. They do point in those documents to the IAF documents. So that's where you might be able to find out more information on the IAF levels documents. But those audit practice groups documents are phenomenal. One of the best kept secrets in the business. Obviously, the team that wrote the standard is writing the same auditing practice group documents, so they know the intent, they know the wording. They're providing probably the best interpretation we can get, and it's definitely worth a read if you're looking for additional information there. In addition, the industry support groups or industry groups have support materials available. I'm an aerospace guy, so I will tout the aerospace resources. Even if you're not in the aerospace industry, these are free and available to you. They're phenomenal documents. Strongly encourage you to go look at those. The first one I've got listed here is the Supply Chain Management Handbook. And if you just Google IAQG Supply Chain Management Handbook, this is the website that will come up. The IAQG Supply Chain Management Handbook is awesome. If you click any one of these buttons up here, it will take you to another screen that has a number of white papers tied to those phases of the supply chain life cycle, and it will go into, you know, a 30-page paper on one specific aspect of how to do counterfeit or how to do an effective contract review or something along those lines. It's all guidance. It's not something that we audit to, but I'll tell you, these are written by industry experts, and there's a lot of vetting that goes into those documents. They're phenomenal resources. There's some clarification documents that exist at the ISO level, and even within the industry documents or the industries themselves. As an example, here is the aerospace one for ISO 9000 and AS 9100, and you can see a clarification document that's been published as well right up here, as well as an evaluation guidance document. And anybody that's had me on an audit, you'll know that these are two documents I point every single client to because of the nature of what's in there. That clarification table is providing some guidance on, you know, the standard says this is what we really intend. Does stuff need to be under lock and key if it's defective? And the answer is it depends. It really depends on a number of features, and that's clarified within that document, okay? In addition, that evaluation guidance material goes clause by clause through the standard and gives you ideas on what companies might do related to the implementation. Again, it's written for me as an auditor to say, these are things that you might see. So now you as an organization can look at this and say, these are things I can do to supplement my QMS to make it more effective. And these are the things I might be able to show my auditor to prove that I have done what I'm supposed to be doing associated with that requirement. So another great document there. So now we'll go on to the next slide, which is talking to implementation. And this is where it's easier said than done, but I will tell you the KISS principle absolutely applies. And putting something in place that's working for you today and driving continual improvement on it is better than waiting for you to have a perfect process, because we know quality is a journey, not a destination. It's something that we're always going to be working to continually improve. If we strive to put a system in place and we wait until it's perfect before we release it, we will never release it. We need to put something in place that complies with that collection of good practices that's coming out of the ISO 9001 baseline. And then we need to make sure that it's tailored to what our corporate identity or our company identity is. If you're a mom and pop 3-person company, you're not Boeing, you're not company X here. You're not a large manufacturing organization. It doesn't make sense for you to have the same level of documentation that a 10,000 or 100,000 person organization has. You still have to meet the collection of good practices, those requirements that come out of the ISO 9001 baseline, but there are a ton of ways to meet those requirements based on what you as an organization need. And who's going to tell you what you need? It's your customers. It's you as an organization, okay? If you've listened to any of these webinars before, you've heard me talk about the importance of organizational context. Organizational context is probably the most important piece of this standard, and it's where you really define who you are, who cares about you as an organization, and what they care about. If you don't know who your true customers are, and I say that in quotations, if you don't know who your true customers are, or your interested parties, as the standard says, you won't know how to appease their requirements, or how to meet those requirements, or how to exceed them. So it's really important that you define who you are, who you're trying to appeal to, and what they care about, so that you can build that QMS or build that management system with that in mind. It does not make sense for you to overly complicate your system, because if your customers are only looking for a rudimentary system that complies or that meets their requirements, and you're building something much more complex, it drives your prices way up, and you may not be able to appeal to those customers any longer. It may be a business decision though, because you want to start appealing to other customers that are demanding a more sophisticated approach to manufacturing or to service. But that's where it becomes important for you to define who you are and who cares about that and what they care about. Keeping in mind that that's a dynamic thing. As times change, so will the expectations of your customers or your interested parties. We know that if you attended our webinar on the COVID-19 aspects, we know that things changed a ton when we went into the quarantine phase, right? Restaurants went from providing a good ambiance in person to now providing for an online ordering platform and the ability to do either delivery or curbside pickup or something along those lines, right? So it became important for them to understand what their customers were looking for and to adapt in a quick manner so that they could maintain their market share, maintain their customers' interest in their organization. Easier said than done, I know, but that's probably and I'll let Marty comment if he wants, but from my perspective as an auditor, from a manager, this is probably the most important piece of this standard, and it really drives everything else that exists within the ISO 9000 series. If you don't understand your organizational context or your organizational identity, you won't understand anything about how to implement the rest of it. What's your thought, Marty?
Oh, I agree with you 100%, Don. You know, and from an auditor standpoint, unless we understand what your organization really stands for and thinks that their purpose is, we've got no basis to start our audit or to make conclusions about how well you're doing against that. So it is the absolute underpinning of the whole system.
Perfect. And then we need to ensure that, moving down the bullet list here, we need to ensure that our system addresses the needs of those interested parties, which includes a very thorough and complete review of the contract requirements. Because even though you may have a verbal agreement with your customer that this is what we're going to do for you, if they sneak something into the boilerplate that then says you have to do this and you have to stand on your head and you have to give us $5 with every unit you ship, unfortunately, that becomes the legal arrangement for your product, right? You want to make sure that you truly understand the customer's requirements, whether they be expressed or implied. Understand those requirements, ensure that you're pushing back on stuff that doesn't add value or adding costs to cover your expenses when necessary, so that you're not giving away the farm. And maintaining that relationship with your customer, with your buyer, with the engineering representatives for your customer is pretty important too, so that they can keep you in the loop or keep you abreast of anything that's coming in terms of maybe technical changes, maybe demand changes, maybe end of life type processes. So it becomes pretty important to understand your interested parties, their needs, and to monitor that on an ongoing basis, because things do change. And on a related note, the last one here, embrace change. We can't be so stubborn that we are the company that you always come to for this, because we know that in this day and age, there are companies that are trying to make everything easier. I mean, who would have thought you could have your groceries delivered by the click of a button on your phone? And yet here we are. And a lot of companies are doing that for zero fees if you get over a certain threshold, right? You need to be able to understand their needs and then react to those needs, and then make sure that you're not doing things wrong associated with that changed environment. We all know that if everything goes perfect, we tend to do okay. It's when those handoffs internally get missed, whether it be something not get filed correctly, or there's maybe a shortage, or somebody was gone for the day. We may not necessarily have a robust process that accounts for all of those different aspects. That's where we're going to fail. So we need to make sure that our processes are built such that we can account for those problems or those potential problems, and then build a more robust process around that. And that's where these audits become so critical, because realistically, nothing is perfect. Nothing goes perfectly in any organization. Doing internal audits robustly, doing them thoroughly, and finding things is going to help you in the long run. If you're not finding stuff through your internal audit program, I'll tell you, you're probably not doing internal audits correctly. You're not doing them fully. Nobody's perfect. If we look at your P&L statements, you're probably going to see that you could do better. So why would we look at your internal audits and see zero findings if we're not perfect? Okay, embrace that. Embrace the opportunity to find things and then to resolve it through corrective actions. Corrective action is the system-defined tool for driving change, for driving improvement. In the same breath, risks and opportunities were introduced into this standard because we had kind of a misunderstanding surrounding what corrective action was and what preventive action was. A lot of folks think preventive action is the long-term solution tied to a problem that occurred. When that ISO 9000 standard, or excuse me, the ISO 9000 terms and definitions document told us very explicitly, corrective action is the action to prevent the recurrence of a detected problem, and preventive action is the action taken to eliminate the cause to prevent the occurrence of a problem that hasn't happened. So we take corrective action for stuff that has happened, we take preventive action for stuff that hasn't happened, and because of the misunderstandings tied to those, we adopted this risk-based thinking culture, which is meant to hopefully steer our thoughts more towards what could go wrong and how do we prevent it, and what opportunities exist for us to make ourselves better in the process. And again, those are dynamic. They're tied to that organizational context as well. Because if we don't understand who we are and who we need to be for our customers and what are we missing to get there, we're never going to improve. Okay. Now, when I say KISS, it's because what we just described through this one slide, as simplistic as it is, I would dare say accounts for 60% of what's in the ISO 9000 standard. Obviously, you have to have a few procedures or documented information items that are retained or maintained. You have to define a few other things. But if you can really address these few bullets that are listed here, you're most of the way there. And if your organization has been around for more than a couple years, you've probably learned all these lessons through the School of Hard Knocks, and you've got the system, you've got the infrastructure in place to check a lot of these boxes. It's just a matter of more formalizing or adding some formality to those items, and then creating some additional review steps to make sure that you're doing your internal audit type activities, okay? We've talked a little bit about this needs and expectations of our interested parties. That's part of that organizational context, right? If we truly don't know what our interested parties need or want, it will make us unsuccessful. We won't survive. If we know what they want, we can evolve. We can surpass our competition because they may remain stagnant. If we remain stagnant, if we don't drive improvement, our competition will get better and we will lose ground. We'll lose market share. Now, I threw in the generational expectations for one reason, and I'm not going to get into a debate on which generation is better, but each generation here has a different expectation in terms of maybe how long they're going to stay at a company, the type of interface they have with your organization, whether it be a face-to-face, a phone call, an email, or a web app that they don't have to interact with somebody. So you need to understand those needs of your customers and to be able to have a platform or have some methodology to interact with them in a manner that's going to keep them happy. I'm sure you've all tried to place orders on different websites and it took way too many clicks to get to the place order type button. And it was one of those where you just got frustrated and you said enough's enough and you closed the website unless it was a product that you really, really wanted. As opposed to somebody like Amazon, as an example, you can do one-click ordering. You find something you want or something that's highlighted on a website, and there's a button that says one-click ordering, and you open the separate app, you push the button, and it's here in 2 days or 4 days or whatever it takes. So it really depends on the type of product, the needs of your customers, and what you're trying to sell, I guess. It's going to be dynamic, as we've talked. We need to monitor the environment and adapt with it. Change is inevitable, so innovation needs to shape a customer, or innovation can shape a customer's needs. Your customer may not know what they want. I mean, who would have thought that eBay would have been a thing, an online auction platform, or Amazon, or any of those types of services, right? They didn't exist really before. You know, the brick and mortar store was a more common approach, yet now they're some of the largest organizations in the world. So we need to keep that in mind, that we really can shape the future if we're truly understanding what our customers are wanting and listening to their ongoing needs. Keeping tabs on your customer protects, or customer projects, or customer projects and your competition to see where the focus has changed. What that means is I'm recommending, I got to be careful how I say this, but if you're not keeping tabs, if you're not monitoring what your customers are doing, it's going to be tough for you to see where those good ideas are and whether or not you're going to have a service that works for that. Not everything your customer does will work for you, but not everything you do, your customers can do. So being aware of what your competition is doing and ensuring that you can at least bring your service level up to that same level if your customers demand it is pretty important. And then the experience matters as well, right? We got to make sure that our customers are having a good experience. Whether it be just in the interface with different people or, you know, the delivery or whatever, but we know that customers are willing to pay a little bit more. They'll pay for service. They'll pay for the service level that comes with it and for being satisfied by their product or by the product. So it's important to keep both aspects in mind, the service delivery and the experience. By the way, if you're keeping score, we said earlier that was a certain percentage of the standard. What's discussed on this slide probably brings us up another 10%, because this really embraces that contract review or customer interface piece, as well as the customer satisfaction monitoring that's addressed in the standard as well. So a lot of basic principles, a lot of simplistic things that are discussed within the standard. Seems pretty straightforward. It seems pretty easy to do, right? But you also have to make sure that you can't always wait for your customers to appear. You have to understand those needs and expectations. present to them how you can shape their lives, how you can make their lives better, what value do you bring to the table, and then understand how you can do that in the most cost-effective manner. Does it make sense to have an online versus a storefront, right? How many Amazon stores exist, yet they're a huge organization because they've got that online presence? Does it make sense to have automation versus live sales? Are people looking for a salesperson they pick up the phone and talk to, or do they want a web app, or do they want a phone app or something like that? Do people care more about the aesthetics versus functionality, the quality versus the cost of the product, support versus being nagged for upsales? Okay, and I'm sure all of us can look at this list and say, I've made decisions on my personal purchases based on each one of these characteristics. I don't like to go to company X because they always try to sell me something else. Okay, so things to keep in mind as we build and drive for that service level. Identify solutions to customer problems, monitoring the satisfaction, and not necessarily just polling your customers, but perhaps polling industry segments or industry groups or online chat platforms, right? There's a lot of forums that exist where you can listen to the voice of the customer and understand better what problems they're facing and try to tailor your solutions so that it meets that needs or meets that need. Listen to the conversation, not just the problem that they're facing, but maybe the experience level that they're having, and try to identify the problems to address that. Can't serve every industry effectively, but diversification is important. What I mean by that is we can't be the industry experts for everything, but if I'm a machine shop, I can easily diversify into a few different segments so that when something happens, say COVID, there's a lot of industries that were not deemed essential and they shut down. And it becomes devastating for an organization to not have work coming in, right? I think we're seeing that across the world today. So having some level of diversification becomes important to sustain the business through those tough times. So staying connected wise, NSF has a ton of resources that are listed here. If you click on any of or point your smartphone at any of those barcodes that are on the screen, you'll be able to connect to our LinkedIn page where we highlight a number of different webinars or white papers or whatever it might be. We also have a number of resources on our NSF-ISR webpage. Just a ton of different things that you can go to. We get NSF email updates that are sent out through our Pardot system, where you'll be kept in the loop on all of the webinars that are coming up, any changes, any customer communications that are necessary. Excuse me. And then we push a lot of the communication out for various clarifications received from industry through a lot of these forums as well. So it's important to stay connected through this as well as maybe the ISO or the IAF type forums. So this is where we'll turn it over for some closing thoughts and questions. Mike said he's got nothing to add. Thank you for attending. We'll give Marty an opportunity to share his thoughts with us, and then we'll get to some of the questions that have been entered into the platform here. And if you haven't had an opportunity to share any of those questions, please do so now through your tool there, and we'll get to those in just a minute. If you're looking for contact info, I'm going to leave this slide up for just a few minutes so you can take down our email addresses, and feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have any questions surrounding today's webinar. In addition, the slides and the recording for this will be sent out in a few days. Melissa will get to that as soon as she gets the recording cleaned up, and she'll get that sent out to everybody as well as posted onto our social media channels and stuff. So with that, we'll turn it over to Marty for a second, give him an opportunity to share his remarks.
Thanks, Don, and thanks for doing the presentation today. I'd also like to thank everyone who's on the call for attending and for having a look at what NSF-ISR has to offer in training, specifically with this one, because as the title indicates, that it is a gateway. When you look at 9001, just basically the Annex SL format does lend itself to building onto a 9001 system and then getting into more and more complex standards and industry specific standards. So once you become adept at working through the basic outline of what a management system is, you can add on to many different things. So once again, thank you very much, and have a great day, and stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, Marty. So good news, we're not really seeing any questions come in. So I apparently did an effective job, or we're not figuring out how to use the platform. And I'm going to go with the former, that it was a great presentation. But you have our contact information. If you see anything or think of anything that you want to ask, feel free to reach out. We're here, we're available. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Or if you're interested in exploring additional standards or certifications that we could do, or maybe you're just looking for a competitive quote on something, give us a call, reach out to us. We're here, we're happy to help. So, Melissa, is there anything that I missed, or any questions that you're seeing that I'm not?
No, we didn't really get a ton of questions today. There were 2 questions, but I was able to answer them. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their time today. And as Don said, feel free to give us an email or check out our website or our LinkedIn, and we can answer your questions there.
Outstanding. Well, thanks everybody for attending, and have a wonderful week.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.